The galaxy was on fire. Loyalists were losing ground on all fronts. For now, Terra was secure behind the Beta Garman fortress system, but if the offensive of Horus continued apace, then Terra would soon be left alone and vulnerable. Yet there was still hope. 5 Loyalist legions were scattered among the stars. If those armies reached Terra, then humanity's home planet would become an unassailable fortress against Horus's crusade. Welcome to our series on Warhammer 40k and the Horus Heresy, explaining the origins of the Imperium and Chaos. In this 7th video, we will explore the fate of the separated legions. When the news of the Dropsite massacre reached Terra, Lord Commander Dawn started sending recall signals to all his forces. He needed every single man for the upcoming defense of Terra. The first major force to receive this message was the Retribution fleet in the Fall system. Alexis Pollux answered this call to arms, which cost him victory and saved the life of the traitor Primarch Perturabo. The Retribution fleet was subsequently scattered inside the raging warp storms, with less than 50 ships reaching Terra, less than 10% of their original strength. The second legion to receive the recall signal was the Dark Angels. Their Primarch, Lionel Johnson, had ambitions to become the next War Master after the Horus Heresy ended. He saw this war as a mere power struggle within the Imperium, instead of a colossal invasion of chaos, capable of destroying everything the Emperor had built in the last 200 years. From his point of view, submitting to the authority of Dawn would deny him the title of War Master. Thus, Lion ignored the recall to Terra, instead spending the next 3 years managing to accumulate victories in several skirmishes against heretic forces. More importantly, he found a Xeno device capable of traversing inside the warp storms. The other half of L. Johnson's legion was under the command of Luther, the adoptive father of Lion from a time prior to the reunification with the Emperor. Luther and several other Dark Angels were sent back to their homeworld Caliban after disappointing Lion. For 60 years, their Primarch did not contact them even once, nor claim any recruits, only using Caliban as a place to dump exiled Space Marines. After learning of the Horus Heresy, Luther put his forces on high alert and awaited a recall order from Lion, an order which never came. The current War Master had not been sitting idly while the Loyalist forces regrouped. In 007 M31, he created a counterfeit signal. In it, he claimed the Space Wolves betrayed the Emperor by killing Magnus the Red and the Legion of Thousand Suns, and by destroying their homeworld Prospero. This signal was meant to provoke Jaghatai Khan with his Legion of White Scars to attack the Space Wolves. Jaghatai had spent the last 6 years chasing the surviving orcs from the Ulanor system to prevent them from forming another war. In their chase, they ended up in the Chondax system, where orc layers were spread among multiple planets. The extermination of the Xenos was painstakingly methodical and slow. White Scar's efforts were further slowed down by a secret artifact that blocked communication with the rest of the galaxy, cutting them from reinforcements and supplies. While the cleansing of the system was coming to an end in 007 M31, almost the entirety of the Alpha Legion arrived. The newly arrived forces split in half, each one commanded by one of the twin Primarchs. The first group, under the command of Alfarius, took all of the battleships and blockaded the Space Wolves in the nearby Alaxxes Nebula. The second one, under the command of Omegon, went to the Chondax system to recruit the White Scars. However, Omegon wasn't loyal to Horus, only begrudgingly following the commands of his twin Alfarius. Instead of following orders, Omegon destroyed the Xeno communication blocking device and allowed the Message of Dawn to reach the White Scars at the exact moment as the counterfeit signal of Horus and distress signal from the Space Wolves came. Impulsively, Jaghatai Khan rushed to slaughter the Space Wolves for killing Magnus, but was stopped by Omegon's newly formed blockade. Omegon's forces weren't strong enough to stop the entire fleet of the White Scars, so he created an illusion. Large transport vessels were disguised as battleships and used as a deterrent, discouraging any attempt at a breakthrough. Meanwhile, in the Alaxxes Nebula, the exhausted Space Wolves probed the blockade. The Loyalist attack didn't have enough momentum to breach the blockade by force. Consequently, Leman Russ, the Space Wolves' Primarch, took a risky gambit. He lowered the shields on his flagship, hoping for Alfarius to teleport on board to end the conflict with an honourable duel. Instead, the capital ship was fired upon, suffering heavy damage in its withdrawal. After this, the Space Wolves had no other choice than to venture deep into the Alaxxes Nebula, a giant red gas cloud which was highly corrosive and capable of dissolving entire battleships in just a few hours. Inside the nebula was an ever-changing labyrinth of paths, big enough to enter but small enough that standard fleet formations were impossible to create. 2/3 of Alpharius' fleet chased the Loyalists, while the rest circled around the nebula to block the exit on the other side. This chase took weeks, with both sides losing escort ships to the unpredictability of the space anomaly. In the meantime, Jegatai Khan correctly deduced that the Alpha Legion alone wouldn't be enough to stop 2 entire legions, and knowing that Leman Russ was impatient and always rushed headfirst into battle, the Alpha Legion forces in Chondax must have been only strong on paper. The White Scars frigates probed the blockade but swiftly retreated. Khan then noticed where the Alpha Legion fleet started chasing the retreating frigates and executed a feigned retreat maneuver. The White Scars fleet, modified to be even faster, quickly created a hole in the blockade, one which transport ships disguised as battleships couldn't mend. Now free, Khan decided against going to the Alaxxes Nebula. Instead, he went to Prospero in search of the truth, to see if the Space Wolves had truly killed his dear brother Magnus, postponing his decision to choose a side. However, Khan didn't escape Chondax with his entire legion. Smaller fleets on the other planets in the system were unable to escape and all were destroyed, about 6,000 Space Marines in total, further distancing Khan from the traitors. The Space Wolves, now without any hope of rescue, attempted another breakthrough, this time led by second-in-command Gunnar Gunhilt as Leman Russ stayed behind, providing covering fire from his damaged flagship. Their attack focused on the forward frigates, sending boarding teams to capture them. Gunnar hoped for Alpharius' battleships to close the distance, as most of the guns were on the sides of the Imperial ships, and the tight tunnels of the Alaxxes Nebula didn't allow long-range broadside combat. Yet, contrary to the Space Wolves' expectations, the Alpha Legion sacrificed their frigates and did not close the gap. The Space Wolves were now left without their boarding torpedoes and dropships, with the Astartes spread thin among many ships. To make matters worse, they would have to repeat this maneuver again if they wanted to break free. Yet now it would be exponentially harder, as they would be fighting against battleships, not frigates. Gunnar decided to retreat, and as the ships were turning in the tight space, Alpharius counterattacked, destroying over 30 frigates and damaging all other ships. The Space Wolves' prospects of survival were now extremely grim. They would all be dead in a matter of days, as many of their ships had damaged engines, being slower than the Alpha Legion ones. With all hope seemingly lost, the Space Wolves had 2 paths left to them. One was to leave the nebula and die in honourable combat, and 2 was to venture deep into the centre of the gas cloud and die slowly. Leman Russ decided to go deeper. Gunnar, however, refused to follow orders, for he wanted to die as a warrior. The Primarch honoured his wish, leaving him as a rearguard. Gunnar died, but not before destroying several frigates and ramming one of the traitor battleships out of the tunnel, melting them both entirely. The rest of the Space Wolves reached an enormous cavity inside the gas cloud, revealing that the Alaxxes Nebula was hollow. Soon the Alpha Legion caught up, formed up, and started exterminating the Loyalists. When Leman's ship's void shields were destroyed, Alpharius teleported on board to show his dominance over Russ. However, before the two traded even a single blow, something unexpected happened. A giant space fort and a new Loyalist fleet showed up on the scene. Luther's Dark Angels had been using the Alaxxes Nebula as a secret base, and, after making sure that Leman Russ was a Loyalist, aided him. Alpha Legion tried to fight back, but with a third of Alpharius' fleet outside of the nebula, and most of the escorts with Omegon, it was clear that they had no chance to win. The traitors retreated, losing dozens of ships while trying to squeeze through a small tunnel. After the battle ended, the Space Wolves fleet remained there for repairs, which would take at least a few years. Before long, Jegatai Khan had reached Prospero, now a dead world with an atmosphere so full of ashes that the surface couldn't be seen. Khan descended to the surface, looking for the body of Magnus. Every building and road was destroyed, and gaping holes reached the depths of sewers and catacombs, while the local fauna had been turned into ghosts. Eventually, Khan found what he was looking for, a living Magnus. The Thousand Sons Primarch told Khan of his folly, of how he sold his soul to the Chaos Gods, but how the transaction had not gone smoothly. When Tzeentch, the Chaos God of Change, was saving Magnus and the surviving Thousand Sons, the soul of Magnus shattered. Each aspect of Magnus was now a separate entity, and the Shard Khan was speaking to was deeply regretful of what he had done. Now possessed with the whole story, Khan had to choose whose side he would join. The Emperor was a tyrant who sent Leman Russ to Prospero, while Horus was rebelling against tyranny but was in alliance with Chaos, an unpredictable force that was unfathomably worse than the current regime. Khan chose to be loyal, ending the suffering of the Magnus Shard. Meanwhile, from orbit, the warrior lodges made their move when the traitor White Scars started a fight to control the fleet, so that when Jaghatai returned, he would find his army ready to join the War Master, forcing him to join the side of the heretics. While the battle on board the spaceships was happening, the Death Guard returned from the Manichaean War with 4 battleships, a fleet smaller than the one of the White Scars. Mortarion descended to the surface, trying to recruit Khan one last time. The negotiations ended with a duel. The speed of Khan was met with the slow but unstoppable onslaught of Mortarion. The fight ended inconclusively when Mortarion became absolutely sure that recruiting Jaghatai was impossible, returning to orbit to save his fleet from destruction. Moments later, when Khan teleported to his ship, he was met with the horrible sight of infighting. The bloodshed was stopped when the Primarch executed the leader of the traitors. However, now in his legion were several thousand traitors who were split into 2 groups. First were traitors to the core who escaped during the brief skirmish with the Death Guard. The other group wanted to join Horus, but their loyalty lay first and foremost with their Primarch, and they were ready to face the just punishment. Khan decided against killing his soldiers, but couldn't trust them fully. Wisely, he sent them on a nearly suicidal mission to disrupt the back lines of the traitors, joining the survivors of Istvan V in their guerrilla warfare. The White Scars, now only about 50,000 strong, engaged in hit-and-run warfare with Mortarion and his fleet. Although this campaign lasted 4 years, it was inconclusive, only exhausting forces on both sides. Meanwhile, oblivious to this entire conflict, Sanguinius arrived in the Signus cluster in 006 M31 with the entirety of his legion of Blood Angels. His forces amounted to 120,000 Space Marines in total, supplemented by traitor word-bearers' guides. This system, according to Horus, was supposedly enslaved by Xenos. However, all scans showed no living life forms. Upon venturing closer to Cygnus Prime, a veil was lifted around the entire star system, severing the system from the galaxy. Soon, impossible phenomena started to occur. On the surface of one planet, lava rivers formed the 8-pointed star, the symbol of chaos. Another planet seemed to be sentient, launching rocks from volcanoes to attack the Blood Angels' fleet. During their travel, they had seen countless civilian ships full of dead, boneless bodies, finding only 30 survivors welded inside a crashed ship. Among these survivors was an Antipsyche Blank, a woman named Niobe. Upon reaching Cygnus Prime, the trap was sprung. Powerful and unrelenting psychic screams filled the minds of all in the fleet. While the Space Marines felt it as a severe headache, the normal humans who operated the fleet were rapidly brought to insanity. Suicides and murders decimated the crew, leaving hundreds of thousands of empty posts, preventing the execution of anything but the simplest ship maneuvers. Then, the demon fleet attacked with one goal in mind: to ram. All local civilian spaceships, now full of demons, grew semi-organic parts, like tendrils or spider legs, helping to bind the ships after the crash. The crippled Blood Angels fleet couldn't destroy them all from a distance. Each time when 2 ships collided, hundreds of demons boarded the ships. The defensive formation completely fell apart when the traitor word-bearer guides left the formation, leaving the flagship, the Red Tier, vulnerable. When the Primarch left the bridge to fight the intruders, the insanity overwhelmed the Red Tier captain, who decided to ram the flagship into the surface of Cygnus Prime. Sanguinius felt the sudden burst of speed and promptly returned, saving the ship from total destruction, but still crash landing. It was a catastrophe, for the ship wasn't built to be inside the gravity well of planets. The Blood Angels only had a little time before the Red Tier would collapse in on itself. For now, leaving the planet, with hundreds of demonic ramming ships in orbit, wasn't an option, so the Primarch and 30,000 Astartes were left alone on the surface. After reinforcing the hull, the army marched to seek the enemy. Countless demonic hordes of Slaanesh and Khorne were spotted around a cathedral made of human bones. The Blood Angels used ranged weapons to mercilessly slaughter the forces of Chaos, steadily advancing towards the temple. Sanguinius soon found his path blocked as the co-leader of the Chaos forces, Kacper, the greater demon of Khorne, coerced him into a duel. In a bloody airborne fight, the Primarch fell with 2 broken legs. All nearby Astartes rushed to save the life of their beloved leader, but Kacper killed 500 of them with a single spell. Sanguinius lost consciousness, feeling the loss of so many of his legionnaires at the same time, men he considered to be his sons. Fortunately, more Space Marines came, managing to teleport their Primarch aboard the Red Tier. The Blood Angels vengefully abandoned any tactics and engaged in vicious melee combat, descending into a state known as the Red Thirst. This condition was a gene flaw of the Blood Angels that Horus wanted to exploit in order to make Chaos Berserker Space Marines out of them. The fight rapidly turned into a one-sided slaughter of demons. Only a few Blood Angels managed to resist the Red Thirst. First were the former Librarians, who decided to use sorcery from aboard the Red Tier to wake Sanguinius, breaking the Edict of Nicaea to do so. The other group was around the blank Niobe. Using her powers, they traversed the battlefield, gathering a strike group of around 20 Marines and storming the cathedral. Slaughtering endless waves of demons, 5 of them managed to reach the heart of corruption, a command room with Kacper, Chris, the greater demon of Slaanesh, and a mysterious casket with a comatose Blood Angel, who was used to amplify the Red Thirst. The Loyalists would be swiftly killed. However, Sanguinius arrived, killing Kacper from behind. Yet before he could kill Chris, the demon spoke. It revealed that, on the battlefield, all of his kin were already dead, but the Red Thirst had not ended. In mere moments, infighting would break out, and thousands would die. The only way to cure them was for Sanguinius to step into the casket, becoming a demon prince. The Primarch was ready to sacrifice himself. However, Meros, an apothecary who arrived with Niobe, stepped into the casket in his place. In the process of saving his legion, Meros became a demon known as Red Angel. Chaos's plan to corrupt the Blood Angels had failed completely. The 9th Legion was now battle-hardened, and all survivors were ready to fight against the Red Thirst, having experienced it once already. Sanguinius, for his part, had learned the most. He was no longer the heavenly angel flying headfirst into battle to save the lives of his sons, nor was he the Red Angel flying headfirst into battle to sate his bloodthirst. Sanguinius had ascended from the 2 angels inside to become a supreme warrior in a crusade against arch-traitor Horus. However, the higher the rise, the higher the fall, as in his slumber, Sanguinius discovered an even worse gene flaw existed inside him and his legion, and if a tragedy would befall him now, something black and cold would be unleashed. Soon after the demons lost the battle on the surface, the battle in orbit was also won. The Red Tier returned to space, and Sanguinius ordered the destruction of all planets in the system after every single Blood Angel body was recovered. More than 10,000 corpses were collected. The Signus cluster was subsequently declared forever dead. Upon leaving the system in 010M31, the Blood Angels received the recall orders of Dawn. However, Terra's Astronomicon wasn't visible in the warp. Instead, there was a beacon in another part of the galaxy. Why wasn't Terra visible? What happened to the Legion of Ultramarines? Find out in the next episode. Our series on the Warhammer 40k Horus Heresy will continue, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.